Hey, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my final tier list of female K-pop idols for 2025, which is also my final video about 2025. I'll make this video once a year where I get to share all the idols that I've been following throughout the year and review their performances on an individual level. I've already covered all the groups in my previous video if you want to go check that out, which I highly recommend. Now, here are all the idols that I'm going to be covering today, which is a total of 99. The most that I've ever covered in a single video. Now, I know there's a good amount of idols that I've missed, but if I keep adding idols, then it's just going to take me forever to finish this video, especially if I add Triple S. That would probably add another 2 weeks to finalize. Anyway, here's my criteria. With idols, I try to focus more on their growth, impact, and stage performances, and just generally if they impressed me or not. Unlike with groups where it's more about the numbers and achievements, this would be more subjective. That said, we got a lot to cover, so let's get started. Alright, let's kick things off with one of my favorite idols of all time, Yeji. I think she had a pretty busy year with her solo debut plus 3 albums with ITZY, which I would say is not easy for anybody. But still, even with such a busy schedule, Yeji still dominated the stage with great performances and has done a standout job with every comeback. Speaking of music, her solo debut was one of my favorites last year, even though it was a short and sweet sort of moment. I think Yeji has shown to be a strong soloist, so hopefully we get to see more work from her someday. With her work with ITZY, she has consistently displayed strong leadership year in and year out, and to me, she still feels like the ace of the group, which is hard for me to say considering that ITZY is quite talented from top to bottom. For that, I will place Yeji within the perfect tier. Coming up, Chaeryeong. I would say in recent years, Chaeryeong has really felt like one of the stronger members of ITZY, as for years it always felt like she was so underrated, but now I would argue that she's on the same level as Ryujin and probably Yeji in terms of overall talent. That said, I think 2025 was a pretty good year for her, but nothing special. Very similar to Ryujin in the sense that even though they had a strong performance, it didn't really feel like a highlight of their career. So for that, I will place her within the solid tier. Now let's talk about Ryujin. Ryujin to me has been probably one of the most consistent idols out there. I mean, since her debut, she's always been a pillar of ITZY, whether it's her performances on stage or even with the music. She's always been one of those idols that you can always count on. That said, I wouldn't really say 2025 was one of her best years. Not saying that it was bad at all, but I wouldn't really compare it to something like her Wannabe or even her Born to Be era. Even so, I did enjoy her performance in Girls Will Be Girls and Tunnel Vision, and has been just as impressive as Yeji in those comebacks, but clearly Yeji's solo debut really sets them apart. Therefore, I will place her within the solid tier ahead of Chaeryeong. Now, let's talk about Yuna. Without a doubt, one of the stronger maknaes out there, and I think since her Born to Be era, Yuna has really matured a lot and has become a more formidable idol. With her solo debut around the corner, I'm actually really looking forward to what she'll bring to us, as we kind of saw a glimpse of her solo potential with her song on Born to Be's album way back in 2024. As for 2025, very similar to Ryujin and Chaeryeong, I think she did pretty good, particularly with Girls Will Be Girls and Tunnel Vision. But again, I didn't think it was as dominant as Yeji or even enough to match up with her performances in previous years. Not saying it was a bad year for her, but it just wasn't anything special. For this, I will place Yuna within the solid tier, behind Chaeryeong. Now, let's talk about Leah. You know, Leah was on a hiatus for the majority of 2024 and returned with a great comeback during ITZY's gold era, and my expectations were that she would have a strong resurgence for 2025, and for the most part, I think that she did pretty decent, especially during Girls Will Be Girls, but I can't lie, there are moments where Leah just looks like she doesn't want to perform. I don't know, maybe she's always been like this, but you don't really feel the energy from her. Like, there's just little to no enthusiasm from her when seeing her on stage, and it just kind of doesn't match the vibe when the rest of the members are clearly into the performance. Personally, an idol could have the talents to sing and dance on stage, but if their energy just doesn't fit with the group, then what's the point? And that goes for any idol. If I'm being honest, 2025 has to be one of my least favorite years for her, and for that, I gotta put her down in the bad tier. Moving right over to Jiwoo, I feel like when it comes to Hearts, most fans really overlook her leadership, and I think out of all the rookie idols out there, she has impressed me the most. So right out the gate with her debut, The Chase, she has displayed strong leadership qualities both in the practice room and really just in general towards her fellow members. I really love how selfless she is and always puts her members before herself, and I think that will take them really far as a group. Now, I'm not saying that every group needs to have a leader in order to succeed, but if you look at the majority of the top groups out there, most of them have really strong leaders, and I think real soon, Hearts to Hearts will become one of those groups with Jiwoo at the forefront. For this, I will place her within the perfect tier behind Yeji. Now let's talk about Carmen. She's without a doubt the most popular member of Hearts to Hearts, and with good reason. She has been really strong since her debut, and I really love her sense of enthusiasm, and you can really tell that she loves being an idol, which makes me really happy for her. Not to mention, I think she fits the concept of the group like it was made for her, and her talent attributes make her look more like an all-rounder. Again, another idol that I would suggest keeping on your radar, as I have a feeling that she will be a 5th generation leader in the coming years. For sure, she has earned a spot up in the perfect tier behind Jiwoo. Now let's talk about June. Honestly, when I first checked out Hearts to Hearts, I was really close to making her my bias, as she has this really calm but powerful vibe to her. She isn't really the most outgoing member per se, but when it comes to her onstage performances, she puts on a show. I mostly liked her on both the chase and style, and so far she's slowly becoming a pillar of the group, but not quite on the level of Carmen or Jiwoo just yet. For now, I will place her within the solid tier behind Chaeryeong. Now let's move on over to Aina. I think out of all the members of Hearts to Hearts, Aina really leans more towards the mature side in the sense that she doesn't really have the same level of bubbly enthusiasm like someone like Ian or Carmen, for example, but combining that with her strong dancing execution, she makes it look cool. Like, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it makes her unique compared to the rest of the members. Now, I do see some potential in her, but I think it's going to be hard to reach the same level as some of the more popular members. Still, it's just her first year, so I'd cut her some slack, so for this, I would place her within the OK tier. Now, let's talk about Yeon. Instantaneously, comparing her to the rest of the group, to me she seems to be the most quiet member. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but when I see her perform on stage, she doesn't have the same explosiveness as someone like Jiwoo or Ian. Don't get me wrong, I still think she's a pretty strong dancer, but what I'm saying is she's not on the same level as probably the majority of her members. She really reminds me of someone like Ray. When she first debuted, she came off as really quiet and not as powerful, but look at her today. She's improved significantly and has become one of the popular idols of the 4th generation, so hopefully Yeon experiences something similar in the years ahead. For now, I would place her within the OK tier behind Aina. Moving along with Stella, another standout member of Hearts to Hearts. I think talent-wise, she is looking to be a well-rounded idol. Now, for her first year, I think she did really well, so think of the chase, style, and focus, which were all great comebacks for her. Again, similarly to Carmen and Jiwoo, I think Stella has the potential to become a leading idol of the 5th generation in the coming years, but admittedly, her stage presence is just a few steps behind them. Still though, I think she's heading in the right direction, therefore I will place her within the great tier. Moving on to Yuha. I would say that Yuha really leans more on the underrated side of Hearts to Hearts and kind of similar to Yeon, even though I don't think she's as powerful as someone like Jiwoo or Carmen, for example. I think Yuha has shown some potential. For starters, I think she matches the group's concept really well, and that's the more bright and youthful vibe that we get with Hearts to Hearts. But besides that, I really like her stage performances, and her sense of enthusiasm tells me that she is enjoying her time being an idol, which is always a great sign for a rookie. Her dancing is also quite impressive, but to be fair, I would say the same about every member. Therefore, I would place her within the OK tier behind Aina. Let's talk about Ian. Now, I know she's not the Maknae of the group, it's Yeon, but for some reason, Ian really feels like the Maknae to me. She is so full of enthusiasm that really radiates on stage, and I think she's been a standout member of Hearts to Hearts since their debut. She already shows hints of being a formidable idol, whether it's her dancing, vocals, and especially her stage presence, but also her confidence really makes her stand out. Definitely an idol to look out for in 2026 and for years to come. For this, I will place Ian in the perfect tier ahead of Carmen. Now, let's move on to Eunchae. For a while now, I've always thought Eunchae as an idol who has always done pretty good with every comeback, but nothing that really screamed highlight of the year. However, with Spaghetti and Hot, I would say that 2025 has been one of my favorite years for her. Now, I wouldn't really categorize her as one of the most talented Maknaes out there, but regardless, I think her star power has improved significantly within the past year, and more specifically since her crazy era. Would I call her a pillar of LE SSERAFIM? Almost. but I still need to see something that makes her really stand out, kind of similar to what Kazuha has done with Hot. Either way, I will place her within the great tier behind Stella. Now, let's talk about Yoonjin. I would say that she's been one of the most impressive members of LE SSERAFIM, probably even as far back as their debut days. Now, comparing that to today, I think Yoonjin is much stronger now. Now, similar to the rest of the members, I think her Hot era is one of my favorite comebacks in her career, and I would even say that she is entering her prime. Not just that, but for their live performances, Yoonjin has shown some pretty strong leadership qualities. Not to say that she could replace Chaewon, but I think Yoonjin could be a pretty good leader. Also, earlier in the year, she released her song Jellyfish, which was one of my favorite songs of the year and my favorite from her solo catalog. Either way, I think Yoonjin had a strong year, therefore I would place her within the perfect tier ahead of Jiwoo. Now, let's talk about Sakura. I would say with how 2024 ended, it was a brutal year for her, but what I really admire about her is that she continues to push forward and does not give up. Granted, yes, she isn't the greatest singer, but what I think everybody overlooks is that she's pretty strong everywhere else. So that's her dancing and her stage presence. I would say that 2025 has been one of my favorite years for her, probably since her Unforgiven days, and hopefully she enters 2026 with this momentum. For sure, I will place her within the great tier behind Yoonchae. Now let's talk about Kazuha. For so long, I feel like Kazuha had a lot of potential but was never really given the opportunity to really stretch her wings. However, last year with her performances in Hot and Come Over, I would say that it was one of my favorite comebacks for her ever. I would say that she has slowly developed into a standout idol of the fourth generation, and I feel like if she were to continue with this momentum into 2026, then she would easily reach the level of someone like Yoonjin or even Chaewon in terms of star power. That said, I will place her within the perfect tier ahead of Ian. Moving along with Chaewon, again, another consistently strong idol and probably one of the strongest among the fourth generation. Her 2025 performances were exceptional, with Hot and Spaghetti being one of my personal favorites from her throughout the year. Some people might argue that we are witnessing prime Chaewon, which I would consider valid, but I have a feeling that she's just getting started. One thing that I would love to see from LE SSERAFIM this year is solo work, and a Chaewon solo debut would be a great start. 2025 has been a great improvement for Chaewon, as I know she did have a bit of a hard time in 2024, and all of LE SSERAFIM if we're being honest, so with 2025 she is heading in the right direction, which I love to see. For sure, I'd put her up in the perfect tier behind Yeji. Coming up next is Lily. For a while now, Lily has always been pretty good, but nothing from her really felt exciting. With 2025, however, we saw a more dominant side to her, with every comeback and especially from her performances with Mesh and Blue Valentine. Without question, one of my favorite years from her, and hopefully she carries this into 2026. For that, I will place her within the perfect tier ahead of Kazuha. Coming up, Jiwoo. Again, very similar to a lot of members within NMIXX, I think for some time she's been slowly improving, and since the start of the FE304 trilogy, I think she's been on a roll with her development as an idol. With Forward and Blue Valentine, I think we are witnessing Jiwoo catching up to members like Haewon and Kyujin, but is just a few steps behind. Without a doubt, one of my favorite years for her, and hopefully she carries this into 2026. Now, not just that, but I think comparing her overall star power today to, let's say, her debut era, she's come a long way. And now, I would even go as far as saying that she is walking on the path to be a standout idol of the fourth generation. For now, I will place her within the great tier ahead of Eunchae. Now, let's talk about Haewon. For the longest time, I think Haewon has been the most impressive member within NMIXX, as her talents have been on the level of an ace for years. With 2025, I really loved her performances on High Horse and Blue Valentine, where she really blew me away with her vocal execution. Now, I gotta say, I feel like she didn't really get a lot of line distribution like before, but at the same time, I really appreciate how NMIXX has been showcasing the rest of the members, so we can finally see their true potential from top to bottom, which is awesome. Regardless, I love Haewon's consistency, and I think she had a strong 2025. Therefore, I will put her up in the perfect tier ahead of Kazuha. Moving right along with Seolyoon. Again, like the majority of the members within NMIXX, 2025 was one of their best years in terms of overall development. For so long, I feel like JYP kind of kept her on the back burner, but since Stick Out, I think she's really been more in the spotlight, where she can showcase her talents. And not just her, but the same can be said for Jiwoo, Bae, and especially Kyujin. So what I'm saying is 2025 has shown a lot of growth for the group from top to bottom, which I think will naturally pull them in the right direction to possibly reach contender status within the industry, not just the fourth generation. For this, I will place her within the great tier behind Jiwoo. Now, let's talk about Bae. As with the rest of the members, I would say 2025 has really felt like a year full of growth from top to bottom with NMIXX. Now, even though Bae had some pretty strong moments, it didn't feel as captivating as, let's say, Kyujin's or even Soleil's. Still, though, I would say that 2025 has been one of Bae's strongest years, with Blue Valentine in particular being my favorite for her. But still, I personally didn't find it as impactful as the rest of the members, but with NMIXX being on such a roll lately, I hope that Bae gets her moment in the spotlight soon. For now, I will place Bae within the solid tier behind Ryujin. Moving along with Kyujin, I think that it's fair to say that out of all the maknaes out there, Kyujin is by far the most talented. With the releases of FE344 Forward and Blue Valentine, Kyujin has been the most impressive member of NMIXX, as for the past few years, she's always been a step or two behind members like Haewon and Lily in terms of talent, but I think now she's caught up to them. Mainly because the maknae of NMIXX has matured, and naturally her physical power and overall attributes have fully developed, whether it's dancing, singing, and her stage presence, etc. Kyujin is firing on all cylinders, which will help take NMIXX to the next level. 2025 was easily one of her best years and personally one of my favorite years for her, and she still has a long way to go, which kind of leaves me excited to see her future potential reach even greater heights. Therefore, I will place her within the perfect tier behind Yoonjin. Now let's talk about Yuki. Yuki to me has always been a powerful idol and a huge pillar of idol, and with 2025 I think she had a pretty good year. Nowhere near her best, as I liked her 2024 performances substantially more, but enough to kind of stand out among the rest of her members, particularly with her solo work with MO. Even though it wasn't as big as Yuke 1, it's one of my favorite releases from her. With Idol, I would say that she did really well with Good Thing. Again, another idol you can always count on to put on a great performance. For this, I will place her within the solid tier ahead of Ryujin. Now let's talk about Shuhwa. I'd say since her Super Lady era, she's grown a lot as the maknae of the group, and by that I mean she's become a bit of a stronger performer. Still, not on the level as someone like Yuki or Minnie, but heading in the right direction regardless. With 2025, it didn't feel as memorable as the year prior. Now, I'm not saying she took a step back, but also it feels like she didn't progress any further than I originally expected. For this, I would place her within the OK tier ahead of Yeon. Moving on over to Soyeon. For years, I would say she's been undoubtedly the most impressive member of Idol, with pretty much every comeback being a success for her. For 2025, it was really light for Idol, but even so, I still think she leads in stage performances. Look at Good Thing, for example. It was their first comeback under a new name, and she really left a strong impression on me. Not enough for it to be a highlight of 2025 or even a highlight within her career, but when comparing her to a lot of idols on there, I think she's in the upper echelon. Not to mention, I really liked her performance on Idol's Japanese release, Idol. I think we could do a bit better on the names of these releases, but that's a discussion for a different day. Either way, I will place her in the great tier ahead of Jiwoo. Moving on over to Minnie, easily one of my favorite solo debuts, not just in 2025, but of all time. I mean, Blind Eyes Red was one of my favorite songs of the year, and with the variety of styles that she provided for her album, we got to see Minnie's full potential as an idol. And I'm not gonna lie, I was really close to making her my bias, but I don't think I can pull away from Yuki just yet. Anyway, besides her dominant solo debut, my perspective has really changed on her, and seeing her perform with Idol, I think she has done a great job. Now, I wouldn't really say it was one of her best years with Idol, but her solo debut was just way too good. So I would place her in the perfect tier ahead of Lily. Coming up, Mion. You know, I was kind of late to her solo release, and when I watched some of her performances, it looks like she doesn't really focus on choreography at all, but more so on the singing aspect. And I gotta admit, she's got some pretty impressive vocals. Probably not on the same level as Rose or even Wendy, but I still liked it a lot. However, I personally wasn't a huge fan of her release. No offense to her, but it's just not what I'm after. With her performances with Idol, I'd say she's always been a pretty solid performer, but would I say 2025 has been one of my favorite years for her? Probably not. Now, it wasn't flat out terrible, but just not as good as previous years. For that, I will place her within the OK tier behind Aina. Now let's talk about Sujin. Being that she's a former member of G Idol, I've noticed that she does have her own loyal fan base, which is great. However, last year was the first time that I checked out her solo work, and for her first impressions, I just wasn't a huge fan. It wasn't flat out terrible, but just not really my style. Also, her comeback felt really short, but again, she doesn't really have the same resources as she once did, so she can only do so much. Either way, it wasn't really enough to captivate me, so therefore I will place her within the bad tier ahead of Leah. Let's move over to Anna. If I had to pick, out of all the members, Anna to me is probably the least dominant member of Meow, and not in a bad way. I mean, if you want to compare her to the majority of idols out there, she's probably slightly above average in terms of raw talent. Within Meow, though, I don't think she's been as powerful as someone like Suwon or Ella, or even Go in terms of on-stage performances. Don't get me wrong, she still gets the job done, but noticeably it's not really on the same level. Hopefully we get to see some development from her in 2026. For now, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Mion. Now, let's talk about Suwon, easily one of the most impressive members within Meow. I mean, not just for her great talents, but also for her consistency. I think she is a rising standout idol of the 5th generation, as her powerful and sharp dancing skills really reminds me of some of the greats like Ryujin and Chaewon when they debuted. But besides that, I think she has pretty much owned every single comeback, going as far back as their debut. My personal favorite would have to be Hands Up, with Drop Top being not too far behind. Either way, she's definitely an idol that I could see reach the level of a 5th generation leader, and by the looks of things, she's heading down the right path. Because of that, I will place her within the great tier, ahead of Soyeon. Now let's talk about Go. Again, another standout member of Meow, and if they were to have a leader, I'd definitely choose her, mainly because of her potential power as an idol. So I really like her tone, and it kind of reminds me of Yuki a little bit, maybe even a little stronger. However, even though I think foundationally she's pretty damn talented, I think she is still a few steps away from being an ace. I've seen a few of her onstage performances, and there were some moments of her being inconsistent, so really, she just needs to find her rhythm. Again, for only her first year or so since her debut, I think she's doing a fine job. But once she does find some consistency, which I think shouldn't take too long for her, she'll be a seriously powerful idol. For now, though, I will place her within the great tier, ahead of Yoon. Now, let's talk about Ella. Again, another standout maknae within the 5th generation, and I would argue that she has the same potential as Chiquita to be a future icon of the 5th generation. Like, she is already a pretty talented idol, and she is surrounded by a lot of talent, which I think will only develop her attributes exponentially. So definitely keeping her on my radar for 2026. As for 2025, I really liked her performances for every comeback, with Hands Up being my personal favorite since her debut, and her live displays on stage are already on an elite level, as she has great confidence and clearly executes sharply in all areas, and can honestly keep up with the rest of her members with ease. I would say Ella has been one of the most impressive maknaes to debut in recent years. For this, I would place her within the great tier, behind Stella. Now, let's talk Narin. I would say 2025 has shown Narin to have a lot of potential. I mean, she is pretty damn talented and has impressive vocals, though her attributes overall aren't as polished as someone like Suwon's in my opinion. Not saying that she had a bad year at all, but I think she just needs to find her rhythm, kind of like Go, another strong member, but there's just a lot of moments of inconsistency when performing. With that in mind, I think she could be a standout idol of the 5th generation once she gains more experience. For now, I will place her within the solid tier, behind June. Now, let's move over to Seulgi. 2025 was a pretty light year for her, but even so, I think with her solo release and her subunit comeback with Irene for the album Tilt, it was a major success in terms of quality of work. I mean, her album was amazing and probably slightly better than 28 Reasons, which was her previous solo release. I liked the variety of styles, and her execution was top shelf work from top to bottom. Also, her performance during Tilt kind of had me question Irene as my bias, as Seulgi was just way too powerful. But again, I think Irene did great as well. Now, would I consider 2025 one of her best years? Probably not, but it was strong nonetheless. Therefore, I will place Seulgi within the great tier, ahead of Stella. Coming up is Irene. Now, comparing her to the majority of idols that you see on here, she had a really light year in terms of overall activity. Obviously, yes, she had her moment with Tilt, but besides that, we haven't really seen anything else. Still, however, even though her time was short, I think she did a phenomenal job alongside Seulgi. That being said, I still didn't think it was as powerful as Seulgi, but again, Irene's style isn't as flexible as Seulgi's. Either way, I think they make a powerful duo and are one of my favorite subunits in the industry. Therefore, I would place her within the great tier ahead of Gowon. Now, let's move on over to Giselle from aespa. Kind of similar to Karina, I think Giselle has been really dominant since her Whiplash era, and since then has really leveled up in terms of stage presence and overall popularity. I feel like before she's always been like one of the most underrated idols out there, but today that's no longer the case. I'd say today she's one of the leading idols of the fourth generation. Last year she was really dominant with Dirty Work and Rich Man, and even when I saw her live last February, she really is one hell of a performer. Without a doubt, she gets a spot up in the perfect tier ahead of Yeji. Moving on over to Ning Ning, I think she's been a pillar of aespa, probably going as far back as Next Level, with Whiplash emphasizing her status as an idol. But with 2025, I didn't feel like she was as dominant as Karina or Giselle in any comeback. She was pretty close with Rich Man, but still, I think it just wasn't as impactful. Not to say that she did bad or anything, I think she still proves to be a leading fourth generation idol, but again, the aespa standard is just in a league of its own. That said, I will place her within the great tier behind Seulgi. Now, let's talk winter. Very similar to Karina, I think her 2024 was miles ahead of 2025. But again, not to say that she had a bad year at all, but more so aespa having one of the highest standards out there today. But comparing winter to the great majority of idols out there, I would definitely have her in the upper echelon. But at the same time, I personally wouldn't really call 2025 a highlight of her career. Looking back at every comeback last year, admittedly, I didn't really feel the same impact from winter as I did with Supernova, Armageddon, or even Drama, which was even before that. I'm not saying winter has fallen off or anything, not even close, but personally, 2025 wasn't really one of my favorite years for her. So for that, I will place her within the solid tier ahead of Yuki. Moving on over to Karina, I'd say Karina has been on a roll for the past 2 to 3 years in the industry. I mean, think of her Drama, Supernova, and even Rich Man era. Karina just keeps dominating with every single comeback with aespa, and it is clear that she is in her prime. Now, I kind of wish that she would come out with a solo release, because what would be a better time for a solo debut than when she's on top of the K-pop world? I would argue that she has the potential to reach the status as big as some of the Blackpink members, and by that I mean her global presence can take her beyond K-pop. Not to mention, her consistency has been really impressive over the years, and I've seen her perform live on stage last February during aespa's Sync Parallel Line tour, and I can see why she is so big. Her stage presence is immaculate, and her level of talent is undeniable. Without question, I will place her within the perfect tier ahead of Giselle. Let's talk about Liz. I feel like it's been a long time coming for Liz. I mean, I feel like she's always been one of the most underrated members of IVE, especially for her vocal talents. Now, with 2025, comparing it to her debut year, it's a night and day difference. I mean, even visually, some people would say that she is even catching up to Wonyoung. And because of this, I feel like her fan base has multiplied exponentially. Personally, however, I really loved her performances on both I've Secret and Empathy, so think of songs like Midnight Kiss, Thank You, and You Wanna Cry, all songs where she really stretched her wings. For sure, one of her best years so far, probably since her Baddie or even Heya era, so for that, I will place her within the great tier ahead of Stella. Now, let's talk about Ray. I think over the past 2 years or so, Ray has really evolved a lot as an idol, so comparing her now to her debut era, it's clearly a night and day difference. She's more confident, her stage presence has improved, and has become a pillar within IVE, and arguably a top idol among the fourth generation for 2025. Similar to Wani and Yujin, 2025 was one of my favorite years for Ray, probably since her Baddie era, and it makes me happy to see her out here receiving so much love from fans and just thriving on stage. For sure, she earns a spot up in the perfect tier behind Chaewon. Now let's talk about Licio. For years, I feel like she's kind of been in the shadow of her fellow members. Now, I'm not trying to say that in a negative context, but that's just what I've seen. Probably going as far back as Ascendio or even Baddie, I've noticed Licio improving on stage over time, and with 2025, I think pretty soon we're going to see Licio develop into a standout member of IVE. kind of like Ray or Liz, as I'd say they've also been underrated in the earlier days of IVE, and look at them now, they've improved a lot. So what I'm saying is Licio is next in line. I mean, naturally she's maturing, right? But also as an idol, she's been in the game for a couple years now, and I think she has slowly evolved her overall skill set. So think of her dancing, vocals, and stage presence, not on the same level as an Ace, but heading in the right direction, I would say. And her confidence on stage has improved significantly as well, which I would say affects the way that she performs, as now you can clearly see that she feels more comfortable. And with that, IVE from top to bottom has improved a lot lately, so this will only benefit them in the long run. For this, I will place Licio in the great tier ahead of Sakura. Coming up next, Yujin. Again, another consistently strong idol, and I feel like people don't really talk about her enough. I'd say she's been dominant since her IZ*ONE days, but her leadership with IVE showed us how powerful she truly is. Similar to Wonyoung, 2025 was one of my favorite years for her, but probably since her Heya era, Yujin put on some really strong displays all year long and has remained one of the most impressive idols in recent years. So I gotta commend her for her consistency. She easily deserves a spot up in the perfect tier ahead of Giselle. Now let's talk about Gall. Kind of similar to Licio in the sense that she hasn't really been a pillar of IVE for so long, but now we are starting to see her true potential. Still, I think comparing her to Licio, I think even Licio has surpassed Gall when it comes to on-stage performances. Not to say that Gall isn't a strong idol, she's a solid idol, but when comparing her to the rest of IVE, especially when it comes to development over the years, she hasn't made as much progress. She's still improving, but still has a ways to go if she wants to reach the status of someone like Yujin or even Ray, and not just in terms of raw talent, but also star power. Now, as for 2025, it felt very much the same as 2024. Like, it was good, but just wasn't super captivating. Regardless, IVE's standard is quite high compared to a lot of groups out there, so comparing Gall to a lot of idols out there, she's doing quite well, especially with IVE having such a dominating year. For now, I'll place her within the solid tier ahead of Narin. Now, let's talk about Wonyoung. I think ever since her debut, even as far back as her days in IZ*ONE, she's always been a standout idol and really dominates the center role on stage. Last year, I think we were getting closer to seeing prime Wonyoung, as I felt like 2025 was one of her best years probably since her Love Dive era. So think of Rebel Heart, Attitude, and XOXZ, all of which were IVE's best songs of 2025, and with those, I think Wonyoung performed really well. Now, she isn't the most explosive idol in terms of talent, but her charm really is in a league of its own. And that's what I really like about K-pop. You don't necessarily have to be the most talented idol out there, as her aura and stage presence is really on an impressive level. For that, I will place her up in the perfect tier ahead of Karina. Up next, Sui. Probably the most underrated member of Kiki. I would say that she pretty much checks off all the boxes for a rookie idol. I mean, her stage performances are really good, whether it's her dancing or even her enthusiasm. It feels like she's already comfortable with being an idol, which is a strong start for a rookie. But more so, I think she's an impressive vocalist and deserves more recognition. I definitely see a lot of potential in her, so hopefully 2026 really allows her to stretch her wings. For now, I will place her within the solid tier behind Yuna. Now, let's talk about Lisol. I think when it comes to Kiki, Lisol has surprised me the most, as she really mirrors Yuki in terms of vocal power. I like how confident she is on stage, and for a rookie, this has left a strong first impression on me. Not just that, but the tone of her voice really stands out, especially in a group that has more of a calm and playful aesthetic. Now, I will admit, it's probably not as heavy as Kia's voice, which really makes her sound like the big sister of the group, but I'll get to her in a moment. Either way, for Lisol, I think she could be a strong rising idol of the 5th generation. For now, I will place her within the great tier behind Sakura. Now, let's talk about Hom. I instantly became a huge fan of her when Kiki debuted with I Do Me, as she really left a powerful first impression on me. The confidence, the enthusiasm, the strong stage performances. I mean, I see a lot of potential in her. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call her an ace just yet, but I think she could be a standout 5th generation idol in the years to come. To me, she really feels like the center of the group, and it looks like she's having a lot of fun being an idol, which is great. And with a positive attitude like that, I think it will take her really far. For that, I will place her within the great tier behind Ning Ning. Up next, Kia. When I first checked out Kiki, I had no clue that she was the Maknae of the group, because If anything, she strikes me as the oldest member, and that's because of her voice. I mean, I was really caught off guard when I heard her speak, but that alone just threw me off. Like, I actually think she has a voice deeper than mine. Anyway, besides her deep voice, I would say she's one of Kiki's most underrated members alongside someone like Sui. So she's a pretty good dancer, she can sing, and her confidence for a rookie is pretty strong. Though I wouldn't really stack her up against someone like Lee Sol or Hom, for example, in terms of star power. But I think Kia has had a good debut nonetheless. For now, I would place her within the solid tier ahead of Yuna. Up next, Jiu. Another strong member of Kiki, but also I feel like we haven't really seen her get much time on the line distributions, so we really didn't see her perform to the full extent like Hom or even Lee Sol. Still though, from what I've seen so far, I'm quite impressed. She instantly came off as an all-rounder to me and has some potential to become a standout 5th generation idol. However, when comparing her leadership to other leaders in the industry, I wouldn't necessarily say that she's one of the strongest out there. But again, she's a rookie, so I'll cut her some slack. For now, I'll place her in the great tier behind Irene. Coming up, Nayeon. Similarly to Jihyo and Momo, Nayeon to me has been one of the most consistent members of Twice and has been a pillar of the 3rd generation. I would even mark her as one of the strongest soloists among Twice, and with 2026, I would say she has had a dominant year, whether it was with Twice, her solo song on Twice's 10th album, or even her performance on the Victoria's Secret show. I think 2025 is a year to remember within her career. Now, I wouldn't really compare it to 2024, which is personally my favorite year for her because of her 2nd solo album, but 2025 was pretty close. Therefore, I will place Nayeon within the great tier behind Ningning. Moving along with Mina, I think Mina is another one of those idols who consistently puts on a great performance year in and year out, but probably not to the effect of someone like Momo or Jihyo, but still good nonetheless. With 2025, I think she has done really well both on tour and on each album. Granted, I think Mina is far more powerful when it comes to Misamo, and we only had one song from them last year, so that was kind of disappointing. But also, I'm sure they just dedicated 2025 to Twice for their 10th anniversary, which is fair. For this, I will place her within the solid tier behind Gal. Coming up, Chaeyoung. Seeing Chaeyoung have a solo debut was definitely not on my bingo card for 2025, and not only that, I didn't expect it to be one of my favorite releases of the year. I mean, she really blew me away with her choice in music styles, being tied more towards a soul/alternative R&B kind of theme, which we don't really see anywhere else in K-pop, so that alone just made her solo debut more unique. But not just that, I think compared to the rest of the soloists out there, for a debut, Chaeyoung's is my favorite. Now, we can't forget about her activities with Twice. I mean, she released another solo song within Twice's 10th album, which again, one of my favorites from that release. So really, I would say that I'm a huge fan of Chaeyoung's solo work, and moving forward, I will definitely keep her on my radar. And we can't forget about her performance on Takedown and her on-stage displays with Twice, which I think were really good. Overall, one of my favorite years for Chaeyoung in a really long time and probably ever. She definitely earns a spot up in the perfect tier behind Minnie. Let's talk about Sana. I would say she's very similar to Mina in the sense that, yeah, she did great with Twice in 2025, but also not really one of my favorite years for her. Now, it wasn't bad, but it just didn't feel as special as previous years. I mean, I liked her solo song and her performances off stage were quite strong, but comparing her to the majority of the members, it just really wasn't on the same level. For this, I will place Sana within the solid tier beside Mina. Let's continue with Jungyoung. Personally, I would say 2025 has been one of my favorite years for her in a really long time. I mean, not only is her tour with Twice going along well, but also her performance on Takedown was really impressive. I also kind of liked her solo song on Twice's 10th album, and now I'm curious to know when her solo debut will be. Even though she's having a strong year, I probably wouldn't put it as high as Chaeyoung or Jihyo, but around the solid tier ahead of Mina would be fine. Moving over to Momo, I think similarly to Jihyo, she's been one of the most consistent members of Twice for as long as I could remember. With 2025, I was amazed by her onstage performances, and I think she dominated the stage during the Victoria's Secret show. Not to mention, I also really liked her song on Twice's 10th album, and comparing 2025 to previous years, I gotta say that it was one of my favorite years for her performance-wise. That said, I will place her within the great tier behind Seulgi. Now Tsui. I think she had a pretty impressive 2024, mainly for her solo release, which I think should have received a lot more attention, as I thought it was amazing. For 2025, I think she carried that momentum forward and had some great performances, particularly within Twice's tour. I've seen some clips here and there, not too many though, as I don't want to spoil myself before seeing them later in March, but enough to see Tsui dominating. Not on the same level as Jihyo or Chaeyoung, of course, but also not too far behind. The same can be said for her performance at the Victoria's Secret fashion show. Even though it was good, it just wasn't on the same level as Jihyo or Momo in my opinion. So for now, I will place her within the solid tier, behind Bae. Moving along with Dahyun. My original bias in Twice, but I've since then switched over to Nayeon for her obvious dominance as a soloist. Anyway, I think Dahyun for years has been really underutilized in Twice, and it's not really her fault considering how big the group is, so she doesn't get a lot of line distribution time. Besides that, I think she's still a pillar of Twice. I mean, she does have her moments here and there, but it's fair to say that it's not as big as someone like Nayeon or Jihyo, for example. We've been seeing the Twice members get more solo debuts in recent years, so hopefully she gets hers soon, so we can really see her true potential. Let's not forget about her performances on Twice's World Tour though, as I'd say all the members are having one hell of a year. However, she's recently been sitting out because of an ankle fracture, which kind of breaks my heart because I was really looking forward to seeing her in March. And even though she's not really my bias anymore, I still do have a soft spot for her. But hopefully she recovers soon, even if she doesn't appear at the concert. I just need her to get better. For now, I would place her within the okay tier, ahead of Shuhwa. Now, let's talk about Jihyo. I think out of the majority of idols in the industry, Jihyo has been the most consistent idol. I mean, she always puts on a show when it comes to live performances, and I love her powerful executions on Twice's songs as well. With 2025, I think she really turned it up to 11 to really push hard for their 10th anniversary, which I love to see. Not to mention, her performance on Takedown was my personal favorite of the three members, and her solo song on Twice's 10th album was also one of my favorites. And we can't forget, her leadership is still one of the best in the industry, which really just shows us the kind of caliber of an idol she truly is. For this, I will place Jihyo within the perfect tier, behind Haewon. Now, let's talk about Yuna. When she first debuted with Eyelid, my first impressions of her were that she wasn't as dominant as someone like Minju or Wonhee, and comparing her leadership to the majority of other leaders, it wasn't really too impressive if I'm being honest. With 2025, however, I think she has shown substantial improvement and is heading in the right direction. I liked every single comeback for her last year, with Do the Dance being my absolute favorite. Her stage presence has improved, and I've even noticed her fan base growing as well, which is a great sign. Because of this, I will place her within the great tier, ahead of Jaeyu. Now, Wonhee. I would say she's pretty much on par with Minju in terms of what she's done with Eyelid, and her consistency in performances being quite impressive, though I would still slightly take Minju over her when it comes to raw talent, but Wonhee has shown some strong improvements in her attributes, especially with her performances in Almond Chocolate. Because of this, I will place her within the perfect tier, ahead of Jihyo. Now, let's talk about Mocha. Kind of similar to Iroha, I think Mocha has shown some great potential of being a strong dancer, and I would say that she has put on some great performances across 2025. Not on the same level as Iroha, of course, but also not too far behind. Hopefully she gets her chance to be in the spotlight more in 2026, but last year I think so far has been much better than her debut with Eyelid. I've also noticed that she has become a lot more comfortable on stage, whereas the year prior, she came off a bit more introverted, which is fine, but now that she's more confident, it's clear why her onstage performances have improved, which is great for her. Hopefully she keeps it going. That said, I will place her within the great tier, behind Lee Seo. Now, let's talk about Minju. I think Eyelid has been one of the most dominant groups of the fifth generation so far, and with Minju, I think she's consistently been one of the most impressive members of the group. She's a pretty strong all-rounder, and in my opinion, the strongest member of Eyelid, and with her performances in Do the Dance, Almond Chocolate, and Topping, I think those have been some of my favorite displays from her since her debut. Again, another idol that I would invest in when it comes to being a future leader of the fifth generation, and for that, I would place her within the perfect tier, ahead of Haewon. Coming up next is Iroha. I would say comparing her debut with Islet to her second year, it's a night and day difference. With 2024, we saw her potential, but with 2025, she really felt like the center of the group and has stretched her wings. So think of her performances in Jellius, Not Cute Anymore, and Do the Dance. I would say every comeback that Islet had in 2025 was her era. And since then, her popularity has gone through the roof. Not to mention, kind of similar to Ray from IVE, she basically runs their TikTok, which has boosted her popularity even more. Besides that, I think Iroha has proven to be a formidable dancer among the fifth generation, and she's just getting started. Without question, Iroha belongs up in the perfect tier, ahead of Wonyoung. Moving over to Youngjung. Last year, Young Posse really stretched their wings with their rapping abilities, and I would say that Youngjung was easily one of my favorite members, so much so that I was considering on making her my bias, but Sunya was way too strong. Anyway, I think she's a pretty strong performer on stage, and even though Young Posse was light on activities last year, from the glimpse that we saw, she really stood out to me, and hopefully she carries this momentum into 2026. For now, I would place her within the solid tier, ahead of Mina. Moving along with Gianna, another underrated idol of the fifth generation. I think she left me with a strong first impression for 2025. I really liked her stage performances, and to me, she kind of came across as one of the stronger members of Young Posse. Would I say it's one of her best years? I have no idea, as last year was my first time really looking into the group, but from what I've seen, I think she could become a standout member within the group in the coming years. But for now, I will place her within the solid tier, behind Yuna. Now let's move on over to Doan. Another really underrated idol, and even within Young Posse, I think last year she really did well on both cold and freestyle, but also I really loved her performance on the ballad School's Out with Sun Ye. Now, even though I wouldn't really compare her to someone like Sun Ye or even Yeonjung in terms of raw power, nonetheless, I still think Doan is still an impressive idol, especially when compared to a lot of idols out there. For now, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Yuha. Now, we got Sun Ye. With 2025 being the year that I became a fan of Young Posse, I would attribute a lot of that to both Cold and Yes Sir. Young Posse is so underrated and have been cooking up some great songs within the rapping and ballad realm of K-pop. And for me, Sunya has really impressed me the most with both comebacks. She instantly blew me away with her performances, and I would consider her a powerful leader within the fifth generation, and she really deserves more credit. For this, I will place her within the great tier, behind Sakura. Now, let's talk about Jiyoon. Now, it's kind of hard for me to really distinguish between the members of Young Posse as they're all pretty strong on stage, but if anything, I would say Jiyoon, even though she isn't as explosive as someone like Sunya or Youngjung, I do really admire her effort. Like, for a maknae, I think she is heading in the right direction, and hopefully she develops into a more formidable idol in the coming years. Now, would I say she's one of the strongest maknaes out there today? Probably not, but I think within a few more years she could develop into a stronger idol. For now, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Yeon. Moving along with Rora, kind of similar to Parita in the sense that their 2024 wasn't as explosive as the more popular members, but also 2025 was much, much better. So take a look at her performance in Psycho or We Go Up or even Super Duper Love, some of my favorite performances by her since her debut. But also, her special performance of Golden really left a strong impression on me and has actually made me a fan of her. Not to say that she's my new bias, I think it would be damn near impossible to replace Asa, but for sure she's definitely on my radar moving forward. For this, I will place her within the great tier, ahead of Unche. Now, let's talk about Ruka. Honestly, one of the most powerful members of Baemon in my opinion, and it kind of surprises me that they don't have a leader because Ruka would fit that position perfectly. I mean, whenever I watch their live stage performances, Ruka's control of the crowd and leadership qualities towards her members is arguably some of the strongest that I've seen across the fifth generation. Not to mention both her Hot Sauce and Psycho era are by far my favorite performances by her. Without question, a rising K-pop legend here. For sure, Ruka gets a spot up in the perfect tier, behind Chaewon. Moving on over to Chiquita, I think out of all the maknaes out there, Chiquita has the highest potential to be a future K-pop legend. I mean, think about it. She's already super talented and is surrounded by arguably the most talented lineup of the fifth generation, which I think would only develop her talents even further than what it already is. So if there's anyone that I would put my money on, it's definitely Chiquita. Besides her talents, I think she had a phenomenal year with Baemon's World Tour. I mean, she already has the confidence and the stage presence of a seasoned idol, which is practically unheard of for a maknae. Not to mention, I think her Psycho and We Go Up performances were some of my favorites from her since her debut. Not even a question, Chiquita deserves a spot up in the perfect tier ahead of Minnie. Coming up, Parita. I feel like for 2024, she was more so an underrated member and didn't feel as dominant as her peers, but with 2025, she has definitely improved significantly. I mean, especially for her performance at the Mama Awards for Golden, where she killed it. And of course, this is in combination with both We Go Up and Psycho being my favorite comebacks for her since her debut. Now, I still wouldn't really stack her up against someone like Asa, Ahyun, or even Ruka in terms of overall dominance, but Parita is heading in the right direction, which is great to see. For now, I will place her within the great tier ahead of Suwon. Coming up, Ahyun. I think Ahyun has been phenomenal the past couple years. I mean, even since her pre-debut days, she has been arguably the most talked about fifth generation idol out there, and for good reason. What I really like about her is that she lives up to the hype, and last year she's been dominating every single live stage performance. I know some people kind of hate on her sometimes for being a little bit over the top, but I really appreciate her effort and enthusiasm. That said, I think she has already proven to us that she's super talented and well on her way to be a K-pop legend. Obviously, she's only getting started, which is kind of exciting to think about what she'll be able to do in the coming years. Definitely an idol that I would invest in, therefore I will place her within the perfect tier ahead of Chaewon. Moving along with Asa, I'd say during Baemon's debut, everyone had their eyes on Ahyun as being the next it girl of the fifth generation, and after last year, I would include Asa in that conversation. I mean, not only is she like a generational talent when it comes to her rapping abilities, but also her stage presence and aura, I would say matches Ahyun. But to be fair, I would say the rest of the members have caught up pretty quick, so think Ruka, Chiquita, Rami, etc. And speaking of Rami, I won't be including her in this video simply because of her hiatus, so I don't think it would really be fair. Anyway, Asa to me has to be like one of the most impressive idols among the fifth generation, and I would say that she is walking down the path of becoming a future K-pop legend. Her stage performances have been powerful throughout the year, and I feel like she's only getting started. That said, I will place her up in the perfect tier ahead of Giselle. Now, let's talk about Belle. I feel like for so long she's been an underrated member of Kiss of Life, but probably since her Igloo days, I noticed that she's received a bunch of support from fans. So her star power is heading in the right direction. Not just that, but I feel like with 224, we've seen Belle reach greater heights with her stage presence. Probably not as strong as Natty's or maybe even Julie's. Now, I think she's close to becoming an ace, but her dancing doesn't really come close to Natty or Julie's, but I'm sure eventually she could reach that point. For now, I'll put her in the great tier ahead of Go On. Now let's talk about Natty. I would say that since day one, she's been one of the most talented idols among the fifth generation, and possibly one of the best dancers in the industry. With 2024 being a defining year to kickstart her career, 2025 was also quite dominant, particularly with her 224 era, and maybe even her Lucky era as well. However, it didn't feel as memorable, at least to where it felt like highlight of the year. I don't know, I kind of feel that way towards Kiss of Life for the most part. Like, it was good, but not as good, you know? Still, when it came to their performances, Natty continues to put on a great show, so for now, I'll just put her in the great tier ahead of Suwon. Now, let's talk about Honol. Again, another talented maknae who I think is surrounded by some of the most talented idols in the fifth generation, and because of that, she has a lot of potential to become a standout idol as she develops over the coming years. She ended 2024 really strong with her performances in Igloo, and I would say for the most part, that momentum has translated over to 224 and Lucky. Even so, I didn't think it was as dominating as I was expecting, and for sure wasn't on the same level as someone like Natty or Julie. Not to say that she did bad at all, but she did just fine. So for this, I will place her within the solid tier behind Jung Young. Now, let's talk about Julie. Kind of similar to a lot of idols on here who had a career-defining year in 2024, I just didn't see the same result in 2025. Still, even with that, I think with 224 and Kiss Road, Julie still put on some phenomenal displays both on stage and in the recording booth. With 224 in particular, I really liked her execution on Heart of Gold, and we can't forget about her feature on Irene and Solgi's song, What's Your Problem? Still, even though it wasn't as iconic as 2024, she still had some strong performances with Kiss of Life. Therefore, I will place her within the great tier behind Liz. Up next, Yena. I was a huge fan of her work in 2024 with her songs Sugar and Nemu Nemu, of course, and heading into 2025, I was hoping that she would really rise up as a leading soloist. However, I really feel like she didn't meet expectations. I mean, she came out with a few songs, but it just didn't feel as special as her previous release. Even her collab with Miku, which I know is a really popular virtual singer, didn't do as well as I initially imagined. Still though, I am a huge fan of her and I hope she returns much stronger this year, but 2025 just wasn't it for me, so I will place her within the bad tier ahead of Sujin. Now, let's talk about Isa. I can't even lie, I think Isa is pretty strong on stage. I mean, she looks like a pretty well-rounded idol and performs with great confidence that reflects on how she sings and dance. Her Bebe era was strong, but I think her I Wanted era was even stronger. I mean, she's a really strong dancer and her execution is quite sharp. Definitely an idol that I would categorize as underrated, not just in the group, but probably within the fourth generation. Definitely gotta keep her on my radar moving forward. For this, I will place her within the solid tier behind Yuna. Now, let's talk about Sumin. Initially, she was the leader of Stacy, but that's no longer the case. I've read up on this a bit online, and apparently Stacy tried rotating their leadership role with every comeback, but now there's just no leadership at all. This kind of threw me off a bit and kind of hinted that Sumin probably wasn't ready for the leadership role, which to me is kind of a bad look, but again, I'm relatively new to Stacy, so I'm not sure how their fans feel about it. Anyway, with 2025, I think she had some pretty strong moments when performing, but it just didn't scream highlight of her career for me. Not to say that she did bad at all, but it just didn't feel as captivating as Shun. For that, I will place her within the solid tier, ahead of Sui. Following her is Seun. Seun to me came off as one of those idols who, yes, can put on a good performance on stage, but she just really lacks the star power. By that, I mean she just doesn't really have the same explosive dominance as Seun or Sumin, for example. Not to say that she did bad at all, but she just needs to find a way to really make herself stand out. Either way, I think she did just fine on both comebacks for Stacey last year, so for that, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Jiyoon. Coming up, Shun. This year, I became a fan of Stacy with her song Bebe, which I would say is my favorite era for Shun so far. She really owns that chic sort of concept and really was the one who gave me a strong first impression for Stacy, so kudos to her. I also really liked her in I Want It as well. And even though Stacy were light on activities, I think whenever they did have a live performance, that Shun did really well. And I had to claim her as my Stacy bias. Therefore, I would place her within the great tier, ahead of Lisol. Moving along with Jay. Being that she's the maknae of Stacy, I think she's pretty decent. I mean, she performs just fine, but at the same time, doesn't really strike me as one of the strongest maknaes out there. So I wouldn't really put her against someone like Tsui or Yuna, for example. And comparing her to the rest of Stacy, she's clearly not on the same level. Her 2025 to me didn't feel as captivating and honestly just didn't really set a strong first impression. For this, I will place her within the bad tier, behind Leah. Let's move over to Yoon. She kind of reminds me a lot of Jay in the sense that she's really tall and sticks out on stage, but again, probably just not on the same level as Shun or Sumin in terms of explosiveness, but I did like her performance in I Want It. Now, it's kind of hard for me to compare her 2025 with previous years as I'm really new to this group, but for first impressions, she did just fine. For now, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Shuhwa. Moving on over to BB. I think she had a pretty dominant 2024, and moving into 2025, it's a night and day difference, and not really in a great way. We've seen a few releases from her, which I personally found a bit underwhelming. I mean, especially her album, which initially looked like a giant release, but most of it was just filler and like a couple new songs. That alone really disappointed me, but also she didn't feel as impactful as she did in previous years. So think of her Vengeance era, or even her performances at music show awards like Mama or the Melon Music Awards, which were staples for her growth. Now, I'm not saying that she fell off, but more so just one of my least favorite years from her in a really long time. For that, I would place her down in the bad tier, behind Yena. Now, let's talk about Jisoo. I think when comparing her to the rest of the Blackpink members, especially when it comes to solo work, it's just not really on the same level. Granted, yes, I think Jisoo still did really well if you want to look at the bigger picture and include every single soloist in 2025, but again, there's just that gap between her, Jennie, and Rose, who've been killing it all year long. Still, I gotta give her her flowers because even though it wasn't as big, I think Earthquake was pretty good. and I think it's slightly better than Flower, which is kind of hard for me to say as that was one of my favorite Blackpink solo songs for a while. Now, as for her activities with Blackpink, I think she did pretty good. Especially with her solo work, I feel like she has really built her own fan base that really support her as before. I feel like she hasn't been as popular as Jennie or Lisa, but that's no longer the case, so good for her. For that, I will place her within the great tier behind Liz. Moving along with Rose, I would say this year has been pretty light with her solo work, but even so, she's still thriving for her work from late 2024, which was, of course, APT and her solo album Rosie. She's made a ton of special appearances and is still winning day songs and international awards like Song of the Year at the VMAs. Not to mention, she has entered as a nominee at the Grammys, which I would argue is the most difficult award to achieve anywhere in the music industry. I mean, she has released a couple songs this year, but they weren't close to anything from 2024. That said, I think when it comes to Blackpink's performances, she was the most impressive to me, especially because she has received a ton of support from fans, which has multiplied her star power tenfold, which is a night and day difference prior to her solo album. Guys, I gotta admit, I'm really happy for Rose, and seeing her thrive and reach absolute global dominance like she has in the past year really proved to us that Rose can handle the solo stage with ease, and has gone from being one of the underrated members to arguably the most popular. Without question, I will place her up in the perfect tier ahead of Asa. Now, let's talk about Lisa. You know, coming into the year, I feel like there was a lot of suspense for her solo album, and even for myself, I had really high expectations for her, mainly because she was my first bias when I first discovered K-pop. Unfortunately, I didn't really feel like she delivered for the most part. I mean, I really enjoyed her song Fuck Up the World, which I think is her best song and replaced Money for me, as I feel like she went all out with that song. But again, I just didn't feel that with any other song on her album. I mean, I was kind of hoping for her to join the ranks of Rose and Jennie as being in some serious contention for day songs last year, but we didn't really see that happen at all. Even so, she still did really good when comparing her to the majority of soloists out there, but still, I just expected more from her. Her performances with Blackpink were actually quite dominant, especially when comparing it to Jennie and Jisoo, so I gotta give Lisa some credit. Therefore, I would place her within the great tier ahead of Seulgi. And now for the one and only Jennie Kim. Kind of obvious where I'm gonna place her, but for me, when she announced her album, my expectations were pretty damn high. But I think that it's fair to say that she more than delivered. If anything, she over-delivered. Ruby was such a jam-packed album full of bangers covering all sorts of styles which complements every mood. So she had ballads, hip-hop songs, R&B, etc. I mean, this album definitely ranks as my favorite album of all time. Everybody talks about her performances for Like Jennie, which I would say has become an instant K-pop classic that has multiplied her status in the industry as a legendary idol, but also has carved out a foundation for the rest of her soloist career, which left me wanting more solo work from her. Not to mention, I think it's obvious that it's between her and Rose for being the top idols in all of K-pop today. With her picking up several day songs and music show wins, she proved to us that she is more than capable of handling the stage alone. She's built for it. I feel like years down the road, when we look back at 2025, Jennie will always come to mind first, as 2025 was really her year. And for that, I would place her in the perfect tier ahead of Iroha. Up next, Coco. I would say she leans more on being one of the stronger members of ISNA, and by that I mean she's had some pretty strong performances, and from what I've seen, she looks like a potential all-rounder. She can pretty much do it all, and her confidence on stage is quite impressive for a rookie. Now, I wouldn't say that she has the stage presence to propel her to be a standout idol, but I'm sure she'll improve in the coming years. For now, I will place her within the solid tier behind Isa. Moving along with Jungkook, ISNA as a group has shown some great potential all year long, and I've liked them from the very start. However, I really struggled to find my bias of the group up until now, and I gotta go with her. I mean, she really reminds me a lot of Suwon in the sense that she has shown to be a strong all-rounder right out the gate, and that her dancing abilities are really powerful. And from what I've seen, I think she might be the strongest member of the group, and I really liked her performances on Mamma Mia and Sign. She's one of those rookie idols that I think could be a standout idol of the 5th generation in the coming years, so definitely keep an eye out for her. For now, I would place her within the great tier behind Licio. Now, let's talk about Mai. From what I've seen, I think she focuses more on aura rather than performance. Like, I don't think she's as explosive as someone like Jungkook, who I would say is miles ahead in terms of performance execution. Not to say that Mai isn't talented, but I don't think she's as dominant as the rest of the members. And comparing her to a lot of rookies out there, so far she hasn't really impressed me that much. When comparing her to the rest of ISNA, the enthusiasm, the dancing, etc., it's just not on the same level in my opinion, and it's kind of noticeable at times. Hopefully we see some improvement this year, but for now, I will place her within the bad tier ahead of Jay. Alright, moving along with Sabi. Being that she's the Maknae of ISNA, I would say that she has shown to have some potential. Granted, she isn't as powerful as someone like Junggeun, for example, but within her own right, I think she is heading in the right direction. I really love her attitude on stage, and her dancing is quite nice, so really, my first impressions have been positive. Now, being that she's the Maknae of a rising group within the 5th generation, I could easily see her become a pillar in the coming years. For now, I will place her within the OK tier, behind Aina. Moving over to Sorang. One of the younger members of ISNA, I think she has been performing pretty well. Her onstage displays have also shown her confidence really shine through, and because of that, she has been able to show great potential. Like, I'm talking in all areas. With Mamma Mia being my favorite comeback for her, she is one of those idols that I'll be looking forward to in 2026. For now, I will place her within the solid tier ahead of Gianna. Now, let's talk about Jimin. To me, she instantly gave off strong center vibes of the group, and not just because of her height, but mainly because of her elegant style. Now, I wouldn't really compare her to someone like Wonyoung, at least not yet, but more so the role that she fills, which feels kind of similar. She's not necessarily the most explosive member, but I think she still fits right in. More about her center role, I think we haven't really seen most idols, at least within the 5th generation, try to adapt the elegant style similar to IVE, as there's been a huge focus on hip-hop. So to me, this makes Jimin a more unique center. For this, I would place her within the solid tier, behind Mina. And there you guys have it, my final female K-pop idol tier list for 2025, and also my final video about 2025. I feel like so many idols, especially within the 4th generation, have shown a lot of improvement, and many of them I would argue are nearing their prime. So think of Wonyoung, Giselle, Kyujin, Chaewon, etc. I mean, I feel like the 4th generation is just getting started, even though it's been quite a few years already. Now, as for the 5th generation, I feel like many idols have shown a lot of promise, and I would argue have had a stronger start compared to most idols within the 4th generation when they debuted. So think of Chiquita, Ella, Ian, and even Honu, for example. Some of the idols who I think are surrounded by some of the best talent in the 5th generation and have all the elements they need to reach total domination in terms of star power in the near future. And let's not forget about the 3rd generation. I think many members from Blackpink, Twice, and even Red Velvet have shown impressive levels of consistency throughout the years, and many of them are nearing a decade of experience, which is a huge milestone to still be active. However, one thing about 2025 that has really impressed me the most would have to be the soloist realm of the industry. I mean, over the past few years, we've been seeing a lot of solo debuts, which I think is excellent not just for the fans of those idols, but also for individual growth. For example, look at Minnie or Yeji, some of my favorite solo work from last year, and that alone has changed my perspective on them. So moving forward, hopefully we get to see even more solo debuts. All in all, I'm quite impressed with a lot of idols out there on an individual level. Now, on a group level, it's a totally different story, and I've already covered that in my previous video if you want to go check that out, which I would highly recommend. That said, another year is in the books, and I look very much forward to the videos that I'll be making in 2026. And if you enjoy these type of videos, I hope you stick around because we'll have so much to talk about. Now, if you enjoyed the video, then please drop a like, as that does help out the channel a lot. And if you want more content like this, then consider subscribing. And please let me know your thoughts down in the comments, as I always appreciate different perspectives. I really want to thank you for watching my video, and I hope you stick around for the next one. Until then, take care.